In this video, we're going to talk about cam and pincer impingement and hip pain and what the science actually says about these bone shapes. And we're going to talk about what you can do to help yourself with hip pain. I'm Matt Shu from Upright Health, where we help you think right, move right, and feel right. On this channel, we cover research that gives you the confidence to take care of your own body, and we show you simple exercises and strategies to help you move well and feel confident about your own body again. If you like this video and don't want to miss out on other videos like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have hip pain and you've been told you have FAI or hip impingement or femoroacetabular impingement, you probably have a lot of concerns right now. You've probably been told that the cam impingement or the pincer impingement or the mixed impingement is causing your hip pain. And since you have these bone shapes, the only way to fix your hip pain is to cut the bones. In this video, we're going to look at what the science actually says about bone shapes and hip pain and what that means for you in getting out of hip pain in the most safe and effective way possible. The first question we want to look at is whether the bone shapes and hip pain are connected at all when you look at the research. And when you look at the research, you find that the FAI bone shapes have absolutely no link with hip pain at all at any age over any period of time. For example, in one study, they looked at a bunch of young men in Switzerland and discovered that 1 out of 4 men had cam impingement, even though every one of these men was completely asymptomatic, had no hip pain problems, and still they had these FAI bone shapes. In another study with 4,000 people over a number of years, they found that FAI bone shapes had absolutely nothing to do with the development of hip pain over time. The FAI bone shapes just have nothing to do with hip pain in any study that has looked at a large population over long periods of time. The second question you may be wondering about is whether the FAI bone shapes have anything to do with range of motion problems. A lot of times doctors will claim that if you have these bone shapes, your hip joint cannot move correctly. So what does the science say about it? Well, the science says that the bone shapes and range of motion aren't related at all. There are several studies that have looked at FAI bone shapes and range of motion, and they don't ever find a link between poor range of motion or even reduced range of motion from FAI bone shapes. In one example, in 2017, they studied 13 to 18-year-old soccer players, all of whom were asymptomatic and did not have hip problems. What they found was that 85% of these soccer players had FAI bone shapes. But they didn't have hip pain. They had no symptoms. What's more interesting is that the MRI findings of FAI had no link at all to how they performed on physical tests for range of motion in their hips. Whether you had FAI bone shapes or not had nothing to do with how you did on a range of motion test. One thing that you might be thinking right now is, okay, fine, you looked at teenagers and saw that there was no link between the bone shapes and hip pain, but what about when you get older? Obviously, those bone shapes are going to matter as you get older and older. In fact, this too has been studied multiple times, and there is no link between the bone shapes and hip pain, and the bone shapes and range of motion, even as you get older. In one example, a study published in 2015 looked at over 400 senior age athletes to see what the relationship was between FAI bone shapes and hip pain. And what they found was that in these senior age athletes, FAI bone shapes had nothing to do with arthritis, it had nothing to do with pain. The FAI bone shapes had nothing to do with anything. So all the research shows that the bone shapes are not related to pain. The bone shapes are not related to range of motion problems. So why are doctors telling you that the only solution to your hip pain and range of motion problems is surgical? The short answer is that all the research around FAI as a diagnosis, all the research around these FAI bone shapes was done by surgeons. And unsurprisingly, all the early research on FAI supports surgery to fix this problem. All the recent research that actually looks at these bone shapes as a cause of hip pain consistently show that the bone shapes have nothing to do with hip pain. It takes time for this kind of research to filter out into general practice and general knowledge. It took years for doctors to stop recommending spinal fusions for back pain, but spinal fusions are still done on a fairly regular basis, even though science shows it's generally not a good idea. The same thing is probably going to happen here with hip impingement. Now that the surgery is very popular and it has become basically standard practice, it's going to take a long time for doctors to realize that the research shows that the bone shapes are not the problem. As somebody with hip pain, you need to take the responsibility for knowing this information. Nobody cares about your body as much as you do. Not me, not your doctor. Nobody else cares about how much your hip hurts or doesn't hurt as you do. So knowing that, do the research, make sure you check out the studies to calm your fears about the development of arthritis, to the development of more hip pain. We've got tons of helpful links below in the description box to help you understand the realities around hip pain and these FAI bone shapes. To get out of hip pain, you're going to need to do two major steps. The first step is to calm your fears about what doctors may have already told you. You need to look at the research that looks at FAI bone shapes and pain and range of motion and arthritis and calm yourself down. All the research shows that the FAI bone shapes have nothing to do with pain, arthritis, or range of motion. So you don't need to focus all your attention and energy on changing the bone shapes. The second step is the action step. That's the one where you need to retrain your muscles. That is a process. We've created a lot of free content on YouTube that we'll link to in the description box to help you troubleshoot your own hips. Try out different exercises. Understand that it will be a process of some trial and error for yourself in getting those hip muscles functioning again. We also have a program called the FAI Fix for people who want to really dive deep into a lot of different exercises and a real systematic way of troubleshooting that we'll also link to in the description box. All of these resources are there with the intent of helping you avoid an unnecessary surgery. So in closing, if you've been told you have hip impingement and that surgery is your only answer, slow down, take your time, watch some of our videos, look into some of the research, and calm your fears. Then start taking action to take control of your hips and your life again. If you liked this video, please click the like button, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos on your hip health, and share this with somebody you know who's also struggling with hip pain. As always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.